I submit for you the front page of the Oregon Daily Journal dated June 8, 1909. On it, we can see the city of Portland had just elected a new mayor in Joseph Simon, coming in to take the place of two-term mayor Harry Lane. He won by a decent majority in an election with a low turnout. Seems like everyone was too busy going to the Rose Festival parade. In his victory, the Republican Simon defeated future mayor and independent H. Russell Albee, but also defeated his Democratic opponent, Judge M.G. Munley. Munley also happened to be the president of the Northeast Side Improvement Association, a group that, like himself, was deeply in support of a new bridge crossing the Willamette in an area further to the north to compensate for a major population increase in the part of town north of Sullivan's Gulch. And, something else on the front page. While many items on the ballot were voted down, including building a Market Street Bridge to replace the Madison Street Bridge, which would ultimately lead to the Hawthorne Bridge, by an overwhelming margin, the voters ratified plans for a Broadway Bridge, an item that the new mayor supported, as well as the Democrat he defeated, and now the project could move forward. Another bridge to help clear congestion and make things easier for those on the northeast side of town. Simple, a straightforward project with no frills, at least until an architect named Edward Bennett came to town. Then things got a little interesting. So while we start in June 1909, because this is when the project was officially approved, the push for a bridge in this vicinity went back a couple years before that. With the east side of the river beginning rapid development in the late 1800s, along with the establishment of several towns and neighborhoods to the north like Albina, St. John's, and Kenton, the area that is today North and Northeast Portland blossomed fast. After the explosion in the city's population between 1905 and 1910, it was reported that nearly half of the city's 207,000 people were living in this area. And the northernmost bridge across the Willamette at this time was the Steel Bridge, which faced severe congestion all the time, often affected by the fact that its draw would be raised up to 5 hours a day. It was felt a new bridge could lead further north traffic into downtown quicker while providing another place to cross the river, thus decreasing congestion, which was getting out of control by this time. It was needed on multiple levels, so, of course, it took a few years to finally happen. An engineer named Ralph Majeski was hired to determine the best location and circumstances for such a bridge, and he, like others, landed on a bridge crossing from Broadway on the east side to the west side, likely coming out somewhere in the vicinity of 7th Street, which itself would later be renamed Broadway. Other possible ends to the west approach included the area around 6th and Irving, along with 7th and Irving or 7th and Hoyt. The dire need was so strong that the city council pushed the project straight through to the voters who, to their great relief, supported it. This is where some of the resistance took off, with some locals feeling the city council overstepped its bounds by pushing this project forward and were likely going to leave the city's populace with the tax burden of covering what was to be a $2 million project. That would be approximately $1.3 million for the bridge, with the remaining funds there to cover any remaining expenses. A key thorn in the city's side on this project was a man named Frank Kiernan, who ran an investment company in town and filed multiple lawsuits against the city to try and stop this bridge project. And he wasn't the only one. In fact, people like Kiernan became such a cause of frustration to the city that eventually, come May 1911, they turned the tables and filed suit against those who had tried to stall the project. Judge Munley, again a key supporter of the project, was quoted to say, "It is time this bushwhacking in the city stopped, and I think there was no better way to end it than to collect damages for what the obstructionists have done." This was right after the finger of criticism had shifted to Mayor Simon only months earlier, and just a few months before the next mayoral election, which he would lose, by the way. It was felt that if Simon truly supported the project, he and his council weren't doing enough to get it going. With a recent railroad bridge project finished, a local businessman, M.J. McMahon, suggested anyone who wanted to use this bridge should be denied until the Broadway Bridge was finally done. It was a tense situation. For a time, in April 1910, the Northern Pacific Terminal Company seemed to provide a compromise that might calm the opposition vis-a-vis how much money the city would need to put into this project. Northern Pacific offered to construct the West End approach to the bridge out of their own pocket, but this is why I call it a compromise. In exchange, they would have the right-of-way to the bridge. However, what started as a simple "we'll scratch your back if you scratch ours" type scenario began to grow, with Northern Pacific making further requests, including the vacating of some streets so that they might use the land they were on. It started looking like they were expecting the moon in exchange for a bridge approach. Ultimately, they would dial it back, and the plan returned to them paying for the west approach strictly in exchange for the bridge's right-of-way. So at this point, you might be thinking, this is a lot of bridge stuff, but where does Union Station, most often known as the Union Depot back during this time, come into things? Well, as most Portlanders know, today's iconic 1896 Union Station, whose tower always reminds us to go by train, stands to the immediate southwest of the Broadway Bridge, with its west approach passing it to the north and the ramp down Broadway running to its immediate west. If you ask most people in this city to name 5 famous buildings in town, most, I believe, would have Union Station on their list. It's pretty important, is what I'm getting at. And yet, had things gone a little differently, it might not be here today. And so enters a man I have mentioned in a few videos in the past, Edward H. Bennett, an architect and city planner who developed a reputation for taking on very large projects. Prior to the 1906 earthquake that changed everything, he worked on a plan for the city of San Francisco. Most notably, in 1909, he completed a plan for the city of Chicago. And these plans covered everything from streets to parks, recreational sites, commercial sites, and so on. While his full report on his plans to beautify Portland would not come out until the autumn of 1912, by the summer of 1910 he was in the city in the early stages of his work. During this time, only a handful of his ideas made the press, including revitalizing the city's waterfront and an idea for this newly planned Broadway Bridge that would correlate with the building of a new Union Station. The details were sparse at this time, but there was a mention of 2 towers being built, one on each side of the bridge along its west approach. Most rail lines in the Pacific Northwest were run by one of 2 major lines. There were the Hill lines, established by James Jerome Hill, a giant in the railroad industry and one-time president of Great Northern Railroad. On the other side were the Harriman lines, established by Edward H. Harriman, another giant in the railroad industry. Hill and Harriman were fierce opponents, but by this time, at the start of the 1910s, they had managed to coexist with one another. But they were still competitors. Competitors who put their support behind Bennett's plan early on. The reason for the two towers approach, one on each side of the bridge, was one side led commuters to the Hill lines, while the other side led commuters to the Harriman lines. It would be a double depot, so to speak, with each tower having an entry point at the bridge level. This is also where the station's waiting area would be, and when the time came to depart, commuters would go downstairs to ground level to catch their trains. We can see this in an early outline of what Bennett's plan was trying to capture. We can also see that the plan was for all of the railway lines to go directly through, or arguably under, the depot. So of course, present-day Union Station stands where it's been standing since the late 1800s, just south of the West End approach of the Broadway Bridge. Now, Bennett's idea in creating a new one was not just about moving it closer to here and having people enter more up on a level like here instead of down there at ground level. He wanted to actually move it further east. He wanted it as close to Front Avenue, Nato Parkway, right there, as possible, to open up more of this land over here to other freight train options. There was already a lot of that through here, and this would have created more space for that to thrive. So while Union Station is here today, the planned Bennett Union Station probably would have been more where this big empty field is now, because the illustrations, and obviously that was just his outline of what it could look like. Had his plan actually been followed, the city may have gone their own way in terms of how it would have looked, but the station that he drew would have been very close to Front Street, and it would have been rather thin. So honestly, this thing here kind of outlines where at least the south tower would have been, because the idea was that there would be two towers, one on this side of the bridge and then one right on the other side of the bridge to serve the different lines. Hello, come to learn a little history today? Well, maybe next time. So yeah, this is about where they would have projected the new at least south part of the station to be. And, the trains just all went under, so the tracks that are over here now would have been more over here, and all of the train lines running into the station would have been just plowing through this large apartment complex now. And with the, I guess you could say, the south side tower entry point being planned to be right over here, then the counter to that is the tracks that go through here today would be more right down here, and kind of where this building is? I don't really know what this is used for. It's kind of greenhousey, maybe that's the point. So you can see everything would have been shifted just ever so slightly to the east. Yeah, just think, standing right here, you'd be walking into a building to go downstairs to catch your train. And the entry would be just like literally right here. There'd just be a doorway. I mean, approximately here, maybe there, but right here. And then of course, counterbalance right on the other side. It would have been really interesting. The objective for having the new Union Station right up against and even going under the bridge was simple. With train travel still so prominent at this time, Bennett knew the setup of the station was important, and he wanted a setup accessible from various directions. Before the Broadway Bridge, everyone on the east side had to cross over to the west side and come up from the south. But with a station at bridge level, anyone coming from the booming northeastern part of town could transport themselves across the bridge, get off, and immediately have access to the train station. But beyond that, Bennett also had a plan for how the west end approach of the bridge would terminate. Taking care of northeastern folks, knowing the people living in the southeast would also have to cross the river and travel north, as would anyone in the downtown area or places south of there, and knowing there were plenty of people living in the northwest part of town, where Union Station was, he had a few more ideas. One was that, after traveling through a small plaza that would stand just west of the new Union Station, the approach would split in two. One would go down Kearny Street, deeper into the northwest part of town, and creating a direct route to the station and bridge through there. And the other would turn directly south and travel down Park Street, now known as Park Avenue, into the heart of the city. So with the idea of one tower being right here, next tower being on the other side of the bridge, Bennett wanted there to be a plaza in this general area, just to the west of it all. So there would have been kind of a place to gather, but also a place for people to get through if they needed to. And while it was a little bit of a sticky situation getting there, the idea was always presumed that streetcar line would cross this bridge. It had crossed pretty much every other bridge that had come through here. And again, it's 1911, 1912. Not a lot of people have cars yet. Streetcar lines are still very much the primary mode of transportation for a lot of people. So it was thought people could use the streetcar line to get through here. Maybe you get off here, maybe you got a while to wait before your train departs. You can hang out in this plaza here. And as you look at it today, as it exists today, it splits here. So if you continue on down this way, that's Broadway, formerly 7th Street. It was 7th Street at the time all this was going on. And then this way is Lovejoy. And this used to be elevated for a much more lengthy period of time. It was known as the Lovejoy Viaduct, better known for the Lovejoy columns that a couple of them still exist a little ways down the road. So this is actually pretty close to what Bennett was actually going for. It's literally, in both instances, it's only off by like a block from what he wanted. Because he wanted, hold on a second, give me a moment here. Boom. And so I'm crossing Broadway now. Again, formerly 7th Street. Now, Bennett personally, and also I think it's a little further down because he wanted there to be a big plaza right here, so they probably wanted this area to stretch out a little bit more. He wanted a route going directly south, like Broadway, but he wanted it to be on Park Avenue, which is literally the next street down. And because that massive post office that used to be here is no longer here, we can actually see through to where Park Avenue is today. And there's this building right there. That's the older post office building. It's like what is it, the Northwest College of Arts, I think is what it's called now. And if I pause here, we're about a block down. If you look through here, you see how it gets all, sorry, I just pumped my camera. It's all briefly forested here. Well, that's the start of the North Park blocks. And the street to the side right here, right by the college, that's Park Avenue. So if Bennett had had his way and any of his project actually came to fruition, it wouldn't have been going down, the south route would not have been going down Broadway like it does. It would have been going down more through here to Park Avenue. And he wanted that because it led you into downtown in general, and it also led you kind of to the center of the commercial core of the city. Now, I don't really think Broadway is really all that different. In fact, if anything, it gets you closer to the commercial core of the city. But whatever the case, at the time, Bennett wanted Park Avenue. And then in this instance, where we're going down Lovejoy, he wanted Kearney Street, which these streets are alphabetized, so obviously K comes before L, so Kearney is one block down. So it would kind of be, I don't know if Kearney comes out along this street here, but it would be pretty much like right in there. So instead of coming down Lovejoy here, it would have just been, you know, you can almost, it would have been like pretty much, see with this little line of like old concrete or whatever it is, maybe it's new, recently laid concrete. That's more about in line with probably where Bennett would have wanted it, as opposed to right here. So I mean, not really all too different. And I think that was kind of part of the thing, was they didn't do exactly what Bennett wanted, but a lot of elements of his plan in terms of making it more convenient for people to get from northeast Portland into town via the bridge, and then also getting to Union Station a little easier. I mean, most of what he wanted was more or less achieved. Yeah, I think maybe I see Kearney through there. So yeah, it would have come right through here. So you'd think with the plaza, instead of everything ending kind of right here, it would have kept going actually kind of off this way. So if you look at where the bridge is at, the bridge, there either would have had to be a turn after, or the bridge would have had to be more angled like this instead of the way it is now. And so things kind of would have ended more kind of just in that area right there. And then one route would have gone off that way and one would have gone off that way.
Bennett even had an idea for how to get people down by the waterfront, or in the vicinity of the Broadway Bridge but beneath it, up to the station's entry point. While a detailed rendering of Bennett's plan for this bridge/train station hybrid was included in his final report, later in this document there was an alternate version of this plan with only one significant difference that would perceivably have an effect on the whole thing. This would be a ramp running parallel to the bridge to its north that could bring commuters up from Front Street, or, as Bennett would have preferred, from another new route that would run between Front Street and the Willamette River.
So right around these trees is present-day Nadeau Parkway, formerly Front Avenue. Right down here. So you'd think Front Avenue is running right here, and Bennett wanted there to be another road between this and the river that would function a little bit more like a highway, get people through kind of capacity. I saw it referenced as like Front Boulevard, River Front Street, like there was different names, but if Front Street, as it was called during this time, was right here, then this, I'll just call it Riverfront Drive, would have been more kind of just to the other side of these trees here. Kind of just coming through here. So one of the problems is it would have probably run right into the old Albermill building, which this building was practically brand new. It was built in 1909. So maybe they would have found a way to like divert it around it, but there were more mills further down. The old Centennial Mill is still down there. That was built around 1910. So trying to build this Riverfront Drive, whatever it was going to be called, there would have been complications. But one of the key elements of that was they could run it through here, and then people could hopefully, this was Bennett's hope, exit off of like an off-ramp and make their way up here where the new Union Station would have been. So this is more about just the construction of the Broadway Bridge more than anything else, because this building was here when construction began on this bridge. So they had to build the bridge next to this building. And I mean, I can stand here, not even have to reach out that far, and I can touch the building because the two are so freaking close to each other. Now that's precision. That's 1911, 1912, 1913 precision right there.
While this Riverfront Drive, as I'll call it because that's the name on the drawing, would never materialize. The concept behind it was fairly similar to another route that would be constructed a few decades later, that being Harbor Drive, which once ran right through what is today Waterfront Park. So in a way, this was an element of the overall Bennett Plan that would later take effect. But as I mentioned, if this route was created, it would have likely caused the removal of lots of mill properties along the waterfront, including the Albers Mill and the Centennial Mill a little further down the road, both of which had only recently been built. In fact, the Albers Mill building was in the middle of construction when Mr. Bennett was starting his work in Portland. And the drawings depicting both versions of this bridge station project show a very short distance between Front Street and the Riverfront Drive, showing that the least of Bennett's concerns were these new mills along the river. And even had there been the possibility of squeezing this new route between the mills and the river, the Albers Mill would still have needed to be sacrificed, as this ramp that would have gone up to the station's level would have had to cut right through it. This elevated stretch is what would have transported people from that area below the bridge up to the station's level in no time, so even those close by but just stuck on the ground level were being considered. While this alternate version was just a sketch and not drawn to scale, we can still see that with this added on-ramp next to the bridge, that the area between the two towers would have been much wider, as would have been the case for the planned plaza to the far west end. The drawing also suggests that with this elevated stretch from Riverfront Drive, that the station could not have been moved as close to Front Street as possible, as was Bennett's hope, but rather it would have been likely located directly north, if not slightly to the northwest of where the present-day station is, considering its closeness to Park Street in the drawing. There was even discussion about having a riverside terminal for those traveling into town by boat. They could exit their watercraft at that site, not too far from the bridge and station, and travel a short distance to also access the new Union Station. Altogether, this would have been a pretty remarkable feat, and even the drawings alone were enough to get some locals excited. This would ultimately become one of the most popular aspects of the Bennett Plan. But Edward Bennett had one serious thing against him: time. It would take over 2 years for him to complete his analysis of the city and present his full report to the city's government for approval. Meanwhile, these same members of the city's government were shaking in their boots about when this bridge was finally going to be built. With Bennett's Greater Portland Plan, published in October 1912, it would only be weeks later that construction work finally began on the Broadway Bridge. While little of it would come to fruition, like it or hate it, the plan Edward Bennett created for Portland was impressive, bordering on fantastical. As had been stated over the years, his plan sought to change the city to make it more like Paris, France. That said, he took inspiration from several European cities, including Budapest, London, Berlin, and Vienna. And a key aspect of the whole thing was opening things up, taking advantage of the city's size and creating a streamlined street system with many arterial routes. This plan was completed with not just the potential, but the presumption that someday soon, Portland's population would eclipse 2 million people. You gotta remember, the city was still riding that high of a booming population following its Lewis and Clark exposition, wherein the city's size doubled in less than 5 years. 2 million people did seem like it was attainable at this time. Portland even felt that it could surpass the population of San Francisco within 20 years. Mind you, the population of San Francisco in 1910 was just under 417,000 people. Portland would not hit this mark until the middle of the 1980s. And honestly, it was for the best. Could you imagine Portland being 3 times larger than it is right now? Whatever the circumstances? It was a truly beautiful plan, but it was not going to happen overnight, if at all, and the Broadway Bridge couldn't wait that long. Something important to remember when one wonders why Bennett's idea was not incorporated into the bridge's construction, even if it was delayed until after the bridge was done, is the fact that building a new train station was not a top priority for the city, as it wrestled with so many other issues. The bridge, on the other hand, was a top priority. Union Station, as it was during this time, was still a fairly new building. It didn't need replacing. The bridge would be completed and opened on April 22, 1913. And since that day, more than 100 years ago, not much has changed around here in regards to this bridge and this train station. Both are still functioning after more than a century of existence. The designer of the bridge was the same Ralph Majeski the city had brought in before. Majeski had the reputation of being America's greatest bridge builder. And while the city was not going to wait to adopt the conjoined bridge station element of Bennett's plan, they at least to a degree heard him out in terms of being able to access Union Station easily from the new bridge. It was noted during construction that a stairway was built to lead people from the bridge to the station, as well as another stairway to lead people to Front Street. The stairways down to Front Street, or Nadeau Parkway now, still exist today, but there is no evidence of the stairway that led down to Union Station. So I went back to take a look at some old pictures of the area, and I didn't find what I was looking for, but I found something. For a time, there was an elevated pathway that went directly from Broadway into the station. Granted, this is not a stairway, and a stairway specifically was mentioned as being built to lead people to the station. It seems likely that there was an actual stairway at some point that was removed and replaced by this path leading off Broadway. And, as mentioned earlier, upon completion, to the west end there was a route in Lovejoy Street headed northwest, and a route, Broadway, heading directly south like Bennett wanted. Broadway, or again 7th Street at the time, was prepped to be widened to allow for the increased traffic from the new bridge heading down to Burnside Street, which Bennett also wanted widened and made into a more prominent stretch of road within the city. That would be another part of his plans that would end up happening, with Burnside being widened on the east and west sides of the river during the late 1920s into the early 1930s.
You know, you always think, well, what if this did happen? Because it would change things, obviously, incredibly. And I personally, this is my perspective, I think if they had gone through with the Bennett Plan and built these towers, one kind of here, one kind of here, something tells me they probably wouldn't have stood the test of time. I feel like it's one of those things that would have been cool at the time, but as we got on to like the 50s and 60s, I don't know, I kind of get the feeling they probably would have been replaced with something else. And of course, had this all happened, our greatest loss would have been our beloved Union Station, which you got to remember, this is the start of the 1910s. Union Station is like not even 20 years old yet. It's a fairly new structure, so it wasn't like it was in horrid disrepair. They've been running on fumes for decades and needed to go.
it was still a robust new building. And I mean, here it is, over 110 years later, and it's still here with us. So that's the main thing we would have lost. May we have lost the Broadway Bridge as it is because it would have been perhaps done slightly differently. I kind of feel like they were going to do this bridge as is. The city was far more concerned about getting this bridge up than they were about building a new Union Station. Again, Union Station was not even 20 years old yet. Their biggest concern was getting this bridge up to deal with traffic congestion and make it easier for the blossoming north and northeast sides of town to get through here a little easier. Before, they have to go all the way down to the steel bridge, which actually you can see a little of the steel bridge popping up there. Now they could cross a little bit closer.
So why did the new Union Station never happen? Aside from the previously mentioned fact that it was not a priority and that the current station was less than 20 years old. First off, had the Bennett Plan been more diligently followed, this new station might have happened, but even then, of all the changes that could have been made, a new Union Station was still not a top priority. And with things as they are, the station was still easily accessible after crossing the bridge and from various other directions, which made a new station, like the one Bennett suggested, even less necessary. If anything, the greatest benefit of Bennett's new station was that it would have taken up less space than the present one, but that's hardly reason enough on its own to undertake would have been a pretty expensive project. And that's another thing. As I've mentioned in previous videos from the same time period, such as the park on Ross Island that never happened, voters were not very fond of being taxed further unless they felt it was absolutely necessary. If they were going to vote down most projects put on a given ballot, how were they going to respond to a new train station to replace a practically new one, with the benefits being a little more space created and slightly easier access from the bridge? It would have had no chance. And that was the general attitude about the Bennett Plan. Those running the city loved it, and even after the Broadway Bridge was done, they wanted to pursue making the Union Station by it a reality. But wanting and the time and money required for execution are two different things. The average citizen loved the plan, but let's face it, a major plan to massively change the place you call home, right or wrong, can be a scary future to face. Many locals were concerned about the drastic change, the cost it would require, and most locals felt even if most of this plan was executed, it would take decades to complete. And by that time, we could have and were looking at a completely different city. Even with the new mayor taking office in 1913, H. Russell Albee, who I mentioned back at the start of this video, adamantly standing behind the Bennett Plan, and with voters approving it in November 1912, aside from adopting a few pieces from it, the plan would gradually fade. It would periodically be referenced in the 20s in a nostalgic sense, while also sometimes referenced when the city was pursuing some new project. In 1924, the sketches made for the plan were put on exhibition at the city's central library, feeling it could be used to maybe continue inspiring further developments in the city. And in terms of new projects, for instance, when the city started pursuing greater work on its parks in the late 20s, they at least used Bennett's work as a reference. And come 1930, with a generation past, the city of Portland sought hiring a new architect by the name of Harlan Bartholomew. Bartholomew had recently completed a plan for St. Louis, and Portland was now heading in a new direction going into the 30s. The Bennett Plan is one of those great what-ifs, even if only, say, half of it was actually done. And something so great we would still be feeling the effects of it today, even if those changes had since been themselves changed. In 1929, the city's secretary of the Planning Commission
stated that Portland had lost millions of dollars by not following the Bennett Plan. Portland would have ended up having a completely different city, for better or worse, creating something of a snowball effect, as many things, such as buildings, that have been built in the last 110 years might have not ever been built because the place that they were ultimately constructed on had been changed through the Bennett Plan. We would likely have more parks than we do today, and no doubt an altered street system. It might have been cool, but the flip side is much of this work would have been an artifact of its time. Bennett couldn't know how much things like freeways were going to change the landscape just a few decades down the road. But that's one of the things about history, an ongoing state of adaptation. Something amazing at one time may be completely impractical 20 years later. Would this Broadway Bridge Union Station hybrid have turned out this way, as I feel it might have, or would it have actually stood the test of time, even if that period of time would be inevitably finite? We may never be able to answer these questions, but it's still another fascinating possibility to think about.